Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 31. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and thank you so much for joining me. I had a great time on vacation. I fully unplugged, and I have to tell you, the first day, I thought I was going to lose my mind. The second day was a little bit better, and by the third day, I had fully relaxed and was no longer concerned about my email, Facebook, Instagram, any of that. And now that I'm back, I'm actually having a hard time even getting back into social media, although the email is, of course, there. So it was a great time. I'm glad that I did it. And if you have not unplugged in a while, I encourage you to do so soon. Okay, so this is the first Tuesday of the month. It's Labor Day. So we are doing the Listener Q&A. You may recall from last month that I promised to do a Listener Q&A for the rest of the year. And depending on how it goes, then we might do it in 2018 as well. So the question this month is from someone that's anonymous. They did not leave a name, but there was a theme. So a lot of you that have filled out the survey, you've been considering transitions, you've been talking about transitions, and another person specifically said that they were looking at leaving a law firm after being a partner there, a large law firm for 20 years, and they're making that leap, and it's really scary. And so I thought the question, even though it was anonymous, was still really good and might apply to many of you out there. So the question was this, and it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. How did you find the courage to make the leap or transition into your own business? And it's always interesting to me when people ask me that question, when they ask, how did you find the courage, or that was so brave of you? Because in my mind, it didn't really feel like I did something that was courageous. But then I go back to the concept that I talk about all the time, but it's easier to see it in others as opposed to yourself. And it's this concept that I call simple courage. And I'm going to go ahead and put this out there. I actually am really working on trying to make this into a TED Talk and even write a book about it because it means so much to me, this concept of simple courage. So I've not really told anyone that publicly, but there you go. That will make me do it. As we learned from Cara 2 weeks ago, I'm going to have good thoughts around it and I'm just going to knock it out. But this concept of simple courage is that sometimes even the simplest forms of courage are the hardest ones to muster up. When we're in life and death situations, when we're in really traumatic situations, it's extraordinary courage. And those are the stories we read about. That's what shows up on magazines because it is just so extraordinary. And it doesn't mean that it's not difficult, but oftentimes in those situations, you just do it because it truly is a survival instinct. When it comes to simple courage, when it comes to making decisions to leave a spouse, move to a new city, change jobs, have difficult conversations, those are really, really hard because they're not life and death. And it's just so easy to stay where you are because at least you know your surroundings. And it's so difficult to let other people down and make decisions that impact others that might seem selfish. And that's why it's called simple courage. It's quite simple, and yet it's so dang hard. So I remembered that, yes, I did have courage to make that leap. It was simple courage. It wasn't that extraordinary, brave courage that we often think about, but it was courageous. And I need to recognize that because I don't want to minimize for any of you the fear you might be having about what it would mean to make your own transition or your own change. So when I give speeches about this concept of simple courage, I always start with a Steve Jobs quote. Now, I really didn't know this quote, and maybe he hadn't said it at that point, when I was making my own transition, but it resonates so much with me, and it certainly captures how I was feeling when I made the leap of faith to change my job. And it really wasn't, I shouldn't just say change my job. It was leaving a really, really good career to start my own business from scratch. But here's the Steve Jobs quote: "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition." That really sums up what was going on for me. It was the courage to do something that was really scary. It was the courage to do something that I was pretty certain would let a lot of people down. And in some ways, it was less about courage and more about the fear of not doing what I knew I wanted to do. That fear, I've talked about in some of my other classes and with clients, there's two sides of fear. There's the fear that keeps you from doing something, and then there's the fear that pushes you to do things. And in this case, it was really the fear that was pushing me to do it, because I started to, whether it was a midlife crisis or whatever, quite frankly, I think I was too young. I still am to be having a midlife crisis, but I have heard several attorneys refer to what I did as having a midlife crisis. So if that's how you want to categorize it. But I started to question everything. And for those of you that have heard my story, I talk about it in episode 1. I just had so many things that were happening in my life that were making me take stock of where I was and what I was doing. And I just started to have this fear that I was not doing what I was supposed to be doing, and that I was not having the impact that I knew I was here to have. And that's where the fear really kicked in. But I want to kind of walk through it step by step so you have a clearer picture of what the path looked like for me. I know a lot of people think that, I just did it, that I just took this leap. But the truth is, it was a 2-year process. It was a journey. I didn't just make the leap. It didn't happen overnight. And I think a lot of times people just see the results. They don't see the process. And so I think it's important for you to kind of get a feel for what that path, what that journey looked like. All right, so I'm going to kind of go back to the beginning of where it started. And I can't not pinpoint the day or even the year. I can tell you that it did happen before kind of my personal life started crumbling around me. But I would go to work. And by the way, I loved being a litigator. I loved having adversarial conversations. I loved going to court. I loved the strategy. I loved all of it. But there came a point when I would get in my car every morning. And as I was driving into work, I would start to feel this pit in my stomach. It was as if I was going to get sick, and I didn't know what it was. And at first it was kind of sporadic, but then it started happening more and more. And there came a point when I started getting that feeling as soon as I got in the car or as I was getting ready, and I had no idea what it was. I was like, what is going on? It was just this uneasiness. And to this day, it's hard for me to explain what that was like, but I've talked to a lot of attorneys that experience that same thing. It's almost this stress response or anxiety that's right below the surface. And so you're driving into work and you just feel tense, and maybe you have that pit in your stomach and you're like, what is this? That's when it really started, because I was concerned about what that was. I didn't know what was going on. And then again, it's all a blur time-wise, but there came a point, and it was honestly, I think, the year when everything started going really bad for me. Personally, suddenly I didn't enjoy the adversarial aspect. Suddenly, I didn't want to fight with opposing counsel on the phone. Suddenly, I started to get nervous going into court, and I had never been nervous before. I always enjoyed it. It was so much fun, but suddenly it wasn't feeling the same way. And I did not know what that was about. I now know, and I will tell you, you may not believe this, but I believe it to be true. I think that a lot of times we know things in our body, and emotionally we know things, intuitively we know things, but we are so dang logical and intellectual that we don't allow ourselves to truly feel or acknowledge our feelings because we don't know what to make of them. So I think that deep down, my soul knew that it was time for me to move on, that I was no longer where I needed to be. But intellectually, I couldn't grasp that. Intellectually, I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. It was what my law school said I should be doing. It was what the bar says I should be doing. It's what law firms said I should be doing. I was very successful. So why wasn't I happy? Why was I having this unease? Well, the truth is, again, my soul knew it was time to move on. And because I wasn't listening, because I refused to acknowledge how I was really feeling, it showed up. It manifested in physical form. And that meant having that pit in my stomach. It meant being uneasy. It meant starting to feel awkward, because I think we get these signs. We get these red flags that something is not right. And if we just continue to push it down, it shows up more and more and more. Now, again, I know that now. I didn't know it at the time. So I just kept trucking along, doing my thing. And then everything started crumbling around me. I was on the brink of divorce. I had a family member dealing with an addiction. My sister died. It was just a terrible, terrible time. And so naturally, I was going to stop and take stock of my life and try to get a little bit of perspective. And the way I did that was, I started going on this spiritual and emotional journey. And that may sound odd to you. You may feel uncomfortable with those words. When I started on that journey, I was extremely uncomfortable with those words. I am not an emotional person. My entire life, I have had really strong, thick walls that kept me from being emotional. And I think it's part of why I was such a good litigator. But it was time for me to actually start exploring what that looks like. And it scared the crap out of me. I didn't feel comfortable doing it, but it was definitely important and life-changing for me. And then also spiritually, I don't really talk about a lot of this publicly, but I grew up very religious, but it was blasphemy to say that you were going to go explore your own relationship with God and decide what that relationship looked like to you. So when I started going on this spiritual journey, that was also really uncomfortable for me because I was doing something that I had been raised to believe was wrong. So how I did that, was I learned how to meditate. I started to go to all kinds of workshops. Basically, for about 2 years, I just said, whatever comes along, I'm saying yes to. I've now read The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. It was not like that. It wasn't like I said, for an entire year, I'm going to say yes. I was in such pain. I needed such perspective that I was willing to explore anything. It was more of my eat, pray, love moment. And so I started doing mindfulness and meditation, and I would go to yoga, and I would do these retreats, and I just wanted to learn about any and all types of spirituality. And, I would go to places where I would be like, what is going on? And then, I would be like, what is this chanting? And then I would be like, I love the chanting. So I was just trying to explore my connection. Why am I here? What am I doing on this earth? What is my relationship to God? Really deep stuff. And let me tell you, most people, they don't just wake up one day and say, I think I want to do this. I think I want to explore this. It happens when you have a major crisis or one after another, and you kind of just get to this point where you question everything. And that's where I was. People often say, how do you get the courage? Well, that's really not the issue. When the pain becomes real enough, when the pain becomes more than you can handle, you will then seek out answers. And if you are stuck continuously and never willing to seek solutions or seek answers, the pain just, although you may not like it, it's still bearable for you. And here's the thing, if I'm being 100% honest, if anyone told me you should really look into your spirituality, or you should really get in touch with your emotions, or you should really, figure out whether or not you're having an impact and you're living into your life's purpose, if anyone told me that before I was ready to hear it, I would have just ignored them. And I probably would have been like, they're crazy, whatever. Like I probably would have been super critical and judgmental about it. So that's the thing. If you're not ready for that journey, you're not ready. And that's okay. But for me, I did hit my rock bottom. I had this breaking point, and there was that lethal cocktail of both, the year where I just had so many personal issues going on, and then that just general unease that I was experiencing that led me on that journey. And it ended up, when I tell this story in speeches, it's always funny because I just say, I had a spiritual awakening / breakdown where I ended up in Tanzania. Tanzania changed my life, and I really can't explain it. Again, it goes back to, sometimes we just have our own experiences that change us, and Tanzania changed me. I don't know whether it was the fact that kind of is the birthplace of civilization. That's where the oldest skeletons have been found in the entire world. But it was, again, this may sound weird, it was very spiritual for me. And I had never felt more at home in my entire life. I had never felt more at peace in my entire life. I'm out on the Serengeti, and the animals, you can just see the wildebeest and the zebras as far as you could see during the migration. And we went into just these amazing ancient areas where there was just this energy that would surround you and give you such perspective. And I know this probably sounds weird, but when I was there, I just knew. I knew that the legal path I had been on as I knew it was over. And I didn't know what was next. And I was not sad about it. The strange thing is, and I think part of it's because, again, when I was there, it's just so hard to explain. There was nothing fearful about it at that time. I didn't even have to grieve the loss of walking away from everything I had ever wanted. It was just this knowing that chapter was done and there was a new chapter. There wasn't a ton of excitement either. It was just this, I just knew deep in my bones that I was closing one chapter and I was starting another. And I was 100% at peace with that. So I get home. This was February of 2014. I get home and I know that there's something next. I don't know what that is. So then I kind of moved from this spiritual, emotional journey to, okay, well, what is next for me? And, I had always joked that I was going to open my own consulting company because I was always fascinated with the consultants that we had come in. And so I thought, well, that might be an option. And I just started exploring all kinds of things. I looked at consulting. I looked at coaching. I looked at speaking. I looked at going in-house. I looked at running companies in a non-legal capacity, both for legal companies and non-legal companies. I explored so many options. And the thing is, looking back now, I know that most of the things that I was exploring, they were safe. They weren't going to have an impact. But the natural tendency, at least it was for me, was to do something that I thought I could really excel at. And that's why I was really doing a lot of exploration and talking to a few different companies about coming in basically in a business role. And they were exciting opportunities. And I was getting really excited about doing that. But then again, I went to a meditation retreat in September and knew none of those things were what I was supposed to be doing. I wasn't supposed to be walking away from my career to do that. I had to go bigger. I had to do what really scared me, what I really felt called to do. And I should mention, I actually told my firm in July that I did not know what was next, but I was looking at leaving. And I just tell you that because so many people were shocked that I did that and advised me after they're like, I can't believe you would tell them. But, I've always been a really direct person, and I knew I wasn't going to another firm, and, I was in management. So I just kind of felt like I owed it to them to be honest that I was looking at making a change. Now, when I actually gave them my notice, I think they thought that I wasn't serious. They were like, we didn't realize you were that serious. And I was like, yeah. I just tell you that so that, sometimes we create these stories in our minds that if we're going to leave our job, it's going to upset everyone there. And I think there were plenty of people upset when I left, but it's not always, as bad as we make it out to be in our minds. And sometimes just being able to be honest about it can be helpful. Not always, right? It depends on the circumstances. But in February, I knew for certain it was time to move on. By July, I told my firm I was looking to make a change, but I didn't know when it would happen or what it would be. At that point, I was actively talking to other companies, and companies were coming to me because I kind of had put word out on the street that I was looking to do something new and different. I actually was pretty far along and about to take a job when I went to that meditation retreat in September, and it kind of like tapped back into that energy from Tanzania and knew what I was here to do was to have an impact. And that was the uneasiness for me. And it was following that intuition. It was not worrying about what others thought of me. And, a big one was finances. It was, my husband. He's always been super supportive of me, but that was going to be a huge change for us. I was making really good money to then go and start my own company, without any guarantees as to how it would go. So, there's a lot going on when you're making those kinds of decisions. But again, the fear of not living into my fullest potential was too much for me to bear. I couldn't handle it. I just had this pressure, and I just had this knowing that I was meant to be making a difference. And I knew what that looked like because I had those visions as a child. And that meant speaking. It meant writing. It meant really putting myself out there and truly helping people with their own careers. It was one thing for me to be a successful partner and practice group leader at a large law firm. It was another for me to empower so many others to do the same. And that's not to say that's your journey, right? You don't have to feel the need to have an impact at all. Like, you don't. One of the things that I talk about in my Career Clarity course is the concept of passion and purpose and legacy. And so many people say that, you have to have those things, but you don't necessarily. And I think those conversations sometimes lead people down the wrong path. So for me, in September, I knew what I needed to be doing, and I just decided that I needed to do it while I was willing to. So here's the crazy thing. I didn't have an elaborate plan. I'm a planner, but I did not have a plan in place. I did have 6 months savings because in February, when I knew that I was going to be making some kind of change, it occurred to me that I should start saving more than I was. So I made sure that I had 6 months of savings so that if I did not make a dime, we could fully pay all of our bills for 6 full months. That said, and I will say, I do have self-confidence, and I think it doesn't mean that I don't have fears or that I don't have low self-esteem, but I have always accomplished everything I set out to accomplish, and I know how to set goals and reach goals. So I didn't really have a concern that I would be able to make it happen. I mean, I'm a hustler. I know how to make it happen, and I'm sure a lot of you are too. So in that regard, I mean, I didn't know how it was going to work, but I knew that if I put my mind to it, I was going to be so scrappy and work so hard and make sure that it was successful. So I didn't have a plan in place. I got back from that retreat, talked to my husband, made sure the finances were in order, looked at a few things, and basically within 2 weeks went to my firm and said, I'm leaving. And I'm starting my own coaching and consulting company. I have no idea what that's going to look like, what the name is, nothing. I'm leaving in 2 weeks. And then I just did it. While I had the courage, I just did it because I knew if I put too much space and time there that I would talk myself out of it potentially. And I just knew, like I said, I knew deep in my bones that that was what was next for me. And so then when I left the firm, right, and then I'm out on my own, I mean, I just jumped in. And that's when I then started really doing the planning. And it's all worked out, right? It's all worked out. But part of the reason why it's all worked out, I know, is because this is what I was called to do. And there was no question in my mind that it was my purpose. And purpose is really important to me. Again, it doesn't have to be important to you, but it is to me. So that's where I found the courage. A lot of my courage came through doing some of that emotional, spiritual work and knowing that I had to take care of myself and not worry about what others thought and not letting the dogma of, the profession or others' expectations keep me in a role that was no longer a good fit. I had outgrown the role that I was in. And that may sound egotistical to say, but I think a lot of attorneys get to that place and they don't want to say that, but it's true. You may have outgrown the role that you always wanted, and your soul's not going to be satisfied unless you make that leap. But that goes back to what I said at the beginning. Only you're going to know that. And if the pain's not real enough, if the fear is not real enough, you're probably not going to make that leap. Again, from a financial perspective, that's always helpful. It was helpful to have my husband's support, even though family and friends and colleagues did not understand it. But you've really got to just do it for yourself if you're wanting to make that leap. So that's my story. And, my thing is, I want you to be happy, right? Whether it's at a law firm or a company or in politics or in business, starting your own thing, as long as the choice is yours and that it's being motivated for the right reasons, that's what I want for you. And so I did want to share with you, the topic was kind of relevant. So I did the Career Clarity beta course in July, and the first group went through. We had 20 people. It was fabulous. I got great feedback, and as opposed to just coming out with the final version, I want to test it even more because I know I can make it better based upon the feedback that I received. So we are going to do another round. It's going to start on September 21st, and we're going to do another round of it. And because it's a beta program, it's not the final version, you do have to provide me feedback and do surveys, but you get several different perks, including a discount. So if you're at the place where you're wondering, should I stay in my firm? Is it salvageable? Is there a way to make it better? Should I leave? And maybe you're not at a firm, but wherever you are, should you stay? Should you leave? And if you're leaving, where are you going? So many people, when they think about job changes, they simply look at pay and benefits and reputation and titles. Very rarely are those things going to make a difference. Those are generally not the things that make you happy or drive you crazy about your job. So if you've been applying for everything coming and going or looking at job boards and you just don't see options, you're probably being very narrow-minded and single-focused, and it's not your fault. It's what we're taught to do, but there's so much more to consider, and there are so many options out there. So if you're thinking about making some kind of transition or you just want to explore your options, even if you're not sure you'll do anything, I would love to have you in the second round of this beta group. Like I said, we're going to start September 21st, and I walk you through everything you need to know. The last group, so many of them said, I had never even considered that. I didn't even realize that I should be looking at it that way or thinking about those questions. I didn't even know to look for that. So I loved the feedback. And again, I know that it's going to be even better this second round. So if you're interested, you can go to legalcareerclarity.com. You can register now. The registration is going to be open for 2 weeks. So now until September 19th. But I should warn you, I am limiting it to only so many spots. And I think that number is 35. I'm recording this before it actually goes live, so I reserve the right to change that number. But I think it's going to be 35. So although it's open for 2 weeks, if you want in, it's also limited by spots. So if it fills up before the 2 weeks, it will then close. So if you're interested, feel free to join me. I would love to have you in the group and work with you on that. legalcareerclarity.com. We will also put that in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening to my story. And I hope if you're not happy, if you're having that uneasiness, that you too will find the simple courage to at least explore what might be the next right thing for you. Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.